Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to part 2 of episode 72 of Futsal868 Corner Talks. By now, you know I'm your host, Geoff Edwards, President of the Futsal Association of Trinidad and Tobago. On Sunday's episode, we were one person short. We had the solo run by Miss Shirley Cabrales, Program Coordinator of the Postgraduate Diploma for FIFA UECIS Sports Management Program. But she did an extremely great job, I must say. Joining us today is the former president of Cricket West Indies, Mr. Whycliffe Dave Cameron, who I must say thank you very much for him for keeping his commitment and joining us on a special edition of Futsal868 Corner Talks. We want to welcome Mr. Cameron. Good day, Mr. Cameron. Thank you for joining us.
Good day, Jeff, and good day to your viewers. And again, thank you for inviting me and also bearing with me yesterday in my absence. So hope I can assist with your objectives on this program. So over to you, sir.
Definitely, we really hope we're excited to be able to piggyback on the great job that Miss Cabrales would have done yesterday. And she has now passed the baton on to you, sir, so that you could stride down the backstretch and finish the race as is customary in first place by Jamaicans. So we really expect nothing less than the best to come from you right about now, right? I know golf is a game right now, but given here Usain Bolt kind of finish.
Yes. No, I appreciate that, Jeff. I would have loved to really have been on the show with her so I could, listen to her and offer the perspectives. But nonetheless, I will, from my perspective, do the best job possible. And hopefully maybe another time I'll be able to come back with her if you require. So
definitely, sir. Definitely. We appreciate that. So let's
jump into it and head down the road.
Yeah, man. Let's jump straight into it. So human resource management in sport. And I'm going to be touching some of the points that Ms. Cabrales would have spoken to. Yes, and just to get your perspective on it. So viewers, just bear with us because we want to be able to hear we heard from a theoretical standpoint. Now we're going to hear from a practical standpoint, and no other than one of the best sporting organizations in the Caribbean, Cricket West Indies. Mr. Cameron, staffing. Ms. Cabrales yesterday said that one of the issues we have when it comes to staffing is, and I'm not going to quote her, I cannot quote her, but as regards to the fact that our in terms of persons who are elected might be elected without having the necessary theoretical knowledge of sport management. Can you speak to that and speak to what was your tenure in terms of Cricket West Indies, both from an election standpoint and also persons who were employed to run the day-to-day affairs of Cricket West Indies?
No, thank you very much, Jeff. And that is a very loaded question, but I think that's important for us to understand. But I want to take you to the beginning because that's a challenge we're having even now in evaluating Cricket West Indies or any other sporting body. First, Jeff, we need to talk about the objectives of the organization. And if we understand the objectives of the organization, then we can start talking about staffing and volunteerism and that kind of thing. And I think that's the problem we are making. I don't think, even as Cricket West Indies, today we've been able to define what is it that we want Cricket West Indies to represent and to be. And that is the question. Because once we've been able to do that, then it's in my mind, will be fairly easy going forward. And it's no different to some of our countries in the region. We have a lot of lawmakers, persons at different levels, and in my view, they're there because there's a void that has been created where persons we believe should make themselves electable are not doing so. And it is a societal issue. But again, we need to remember that we're we're young nations coming out of democracy, independence, only about 60 years, I think, in the case of Jamaica. And in the rest of the islands, much shorter. So it is something that is not about sports, is endemic to our region, and something we need to look at. Prior to independence and just after, a lot of the administrators, sports administrators in our region, worked as administrators within their own organizations and added sports as something that they did. So, for example, there's a gentleman in Jamaica, now deceased of blessed memory, by the name of Pat Anderson, who was a sports coordinator at one of our major sporting, I want to call it center of the island, sporting mecca, Kirkvine. He was an administrator at Kirkvine for the Bauxite Company, and by virtue of his job, ended up becoming president and senior in a lot of our sporting organizations, the Jamaica Football Federation, the J3, the Athletic Association. And so just after independence, leading up to maybe 1990, that's how a lot of the sports administrators were elected, became volunteers, were part of these organizations. Where we are today, we have to now look at a different model. And so in a discussion around staffing and the people we want, we need to first ask ourselves where we are as a governing body, whichever sport it is, and then where do we want to go, and then therefore decide what is the type of management, leadership, staffing that we require. In the case of Cricket West Indies, what I did was that I decided in my manifesto when I was going in, what are the things that we thought were important at the time. The things we thought about were professionalizing cricket. We wanted to get our finances in order, and we wanted to start winning. And so those are our objectives. And so our organization was structured around that. So we made sure we had a CEO that understood finances and business. And we brought in a high performance director in the name of Richard Pybus, and he started to help us to craft our performance plan, and we hired persons around that to make sure we could deliver. So in anything that we're doing is really about the objectives, and then how do we staff, recruit persons around that.
It basically sounds like there was an HR audit. And what you're suggesting is that organizations, based on the objectives that they have set, look at an HR audit. Is that correct to say?
That is exactly correct. That is exactly correct. To see what you have in place to be able to meet your objectives before we just start talking about volunteers and who is it and what type of leader we need. Again, Jeff, and we'll probably talk about it later, but it depends on where your organization is. Also, you need different types of leadership management styles in order to move it forward or to just consolidate. And so all of these things are important as an organization, as the board, the governing body, sitting together and determining where we're at in our cycle and what type of management or type of organization we need in order to meet the objectives.
You mentioned that times are changing and the model is changing, i.e., and you give the example of your compatriot, your Jamaican compatriot, who would have, because of his position, he would have ended up in sport volunteerism. And then we have presently there are a lot of young persons, the University of West Indies, the University of Trinidad and Tobago, and when I say University of West Indies, all three campuses having sport-related courses, undergrad.
I'm losing you, Jeff. I'm not hearing you. No, I've lost you.
Okay, are you hearing me now?
I'm hearing you now. Yes.
Great. So what I'm saying is that what I was saying before was that we are now churning out, and that's the terminology I used yesterday. Yes. We are now churning out a lot of sports-related professionals, both undergrad and postgrad. And that's so that model is changing. Now, the next question is, do we have enough opportunities for them in the Caribbean for them to be able to flourish? That's one. And two, do we have succession planning in place that the older generation can be able to welcome the younger generation and mentor them in their journey in sport? And I will say this amicably, because there are many stories where we find that the older folk may not want to relinquish power, given the fact that they have put in blood, sweat, and tears.
Yeah, and Jeff, that is the really what seemed like you're reading my mind, because that's where we need to get to. We have a number of persons now trained in sports management. I believe there are enough opportunities in the region, but again, you and I, persons like us, and Carol Beckfords and your co-host yesterday, we have to educate and re-educate our landscape about what is required in sports. One of the challenges we have is that there's still a view that that these persons coming out of university or people in sports should all be volunteers. And if you're a young person coming out of college, you need to be paid. Okay? So we need to start a shift and in our minds in these major sports away from volunteerism to professional help as well as volunteerism. So you do need volunteers, but we need to start talking about how do we pay these youngsters, who some of them are former athletes themselves. So they come with a lot of knowledge of the sport and administration now, which is part of the mix that I have. Even though I didn't play at a very high level, but I have played sports all my life in different facets. So how do we embrace those persons? But at the same time, you speak about succession planning. How do we also retain the institutional knowledge from the older folks in letting them understand that their knowledge and institution is very important to our success going forward? And I think it's a sell job. It's not something that we're going to do overnight. It's something, it's education. But again, if we can get, in my view, one of the things I did was we had a couple of retreats, two in fact, when I just started in 2013, and we did a review in 2018, I think, of our strategic objectives. If we're able to do that as an organization and agree on where we want to go, then if you can convince those in the room, then it's sometimes easier to convince the wider section of your sport that this is the way to go. And so this is where I think we can't just say that's something that needs to happen. We need to look at the particular sports. There are certain sports, for example, football, cricket, athletics in the Caribbean, I believe, are world-class sports and could be world-class. We do compete with the world. And so our management, our staffing should be world-class. There's really no reason why we should be saying we should be cutting any corners. And that is where we need to start. And then there are lesser sports, and lesser by means of numbers, by means of the opportunity for international recognition, etc., that we can over time improve. And so, Jeff, the model that I look at always is Australia and New Zealand, and more so New Zealand, which is a similar size to the Caribbean. As a matter of fact, it's smaller in terms of population than the English-speaking Caribbean. And you see what they're doing they just came second in the World T20. They're the Test champions. And they were beaten finalists again in the Under-19 World Cup, in the 2019 ICC World Cup. So that says to us, if we're organized and serious about sports, then we can actually do much better than we're doing, because we have all the other natural abilities, so to speak. Is how do we organize ourselves, and it's how do we get the staff and get the expertise. And if we don't have it, we can buy it. But firstly, we need to understand what we want. And so, yes, there are enough opportunities within sports for all these graduates coming out of school, in my mind. And we also need to maintain our volunteers, and we need to have the education with our incumbents, our seniors, to help them to transition to where we are. And the truth is, we need those older folks as mentors. And, like one of my mentor always told me when we were at Kensington, of blessed memory, Mr. Vincent Wong, is that there are no new ideas. It's really different times. And so, sometimes you, as a young man, you're getting up and, we have a brilliant idea, we're going to do this. And it's like, we thought about that before. So it's not that we didn't think about it, but the times were different. Maybe we could do it now because times are different, and these are the differences. And so we need persons like that.
There are two things that you said, and that really jumped out at me. You were spot on when you spoke about Australia and New Zealand, because I was just going to ask you the question. When you look left to North America and the North American model of sport, and then you look across the pond in terms of cricket in that of England, Australia, India, South Africa, and you see how they do it, even from a human resource management standpoint, it really makes us wonder, given the fact that we, as West Indies cricket, have been number one for years, for decades, how are we now going to get back to being number one? But it also ties in, my next point ties into the last thing you said. There are no new ideas under the sun. I get that. But some young person is going to say, Mr. Cameron, if we come to the table and we speak about OTT, we speak about data properties, we speak about intellectual property, which the last one you all may know a little bit about it, but we are also bringing in new age technology, data science, things that really and truly persons may not have heard about. How are we now going to marry those new thoughts and the old thoughts, noting, and you're quite right, because the Bible said it, there's no new thing under the sun, but yet there are new thoughts.
There are new thoughts.
Expressions of thought.
And absolutely, and new ways of doing the thing you used to do better. I mean, that's what it is. So the data science and all of those things used to be a very long way, a very long-winded way of getting information. Now we have tools that allows us to capture the information much easier. So again, the truth is, Jeff, we could go on and on about this because it is very, very important. But again, I want to take you to a very high level. It comes from our cultural orientation. So Australia and New Zealand have a performance culture. They have a sporting culture. Their laws, etc., are designed to support sporting activities. Their school system, their whole culture. If you've ever been to Australia, everybody runs, everybody plays a sport. One of the things that was fascinating to me was meeting my counterparts at the ICC meetings, all their wives, and they were all over 60, played tennis in the days, or they played golf, or both. And these are ladies, over 60. That's a cultural thing of that side of the world. So when we're talking about sports and that, we can't divorce our historical context and content from it, right? One of the things I've been trying to do in Jamaica, for example, is trying to get Jamaica to adopt some of the provisions in your tax code. Namely, providing tax incentives for companies that invest in sports and entertainment. Those are the things that will assist us in being able to recruit the right people. Because part of the problem is that if you have sports and we're not able to recruit, we're not able to get sponsorships, then all of what we're talking about is for naught. Because remember, coming back to where we started, is that we need to get the right people in place. We now have a lot of graduates coming out of school. How do we get them employed? How do we get them in place? Once we have that, then we can always have the discussion about, you know, I don't believe that there's anybody that I've ever met who's just closed to the future and to what is happening. It's all discussion. And once you can explain to the leaders, current leaders, you're not here to replace them, but if we agree on the objectives and this is what you want to do, then the young people like ourselves are just coming in to aid you to get to the objectives. But the key is all of this has to be part and parcel of a mindset, and not just a mindset. It's a cultural way of how we want to see ourselves, because I believe the Caribbean is a sporting destination. But have we treated it that way? Are we making legislation? Are we encouraging it? No, we are not. We're saying some things. The university has gone ahead. They've implemented all these sporting degrees, etc. But I think the government now needs to have a talk with this private sector and say, how do we actually make this a reality by incentivizing, by changing our own mindset? You know, yes, since COVID, as a matter of fact, there's been a lot more persons you see on the road jogging every day, and somehow there's more of an awareness, health awareness. This is something that I saw in, like I said, New Zealand and Australia. It's what they do. Everybody, you know, every sport is available in high school. So if you are an Australian and New Zealander, you would have been exposed to almost every sport in high school or university.
Let's shift to satisfaction, motivation, and commitment. As a sport leader in your time, and let's look at past, present, and future. Do you think that we as Caribbean sport leaders and practitioners of the business of sport, some people might say we don't have that, but let's just talk about let's say we did sport on the whole. Do you think that we are motivated? Was your staff motivated to make Cricket West Indies better? Was your staff satisfied at did they have job satisfaction, and were they committed to putting us back on the map? And again, yes, I know it's a loaded question, Mr. Cameron, but I want to give our viewers a sense of what was happening there, and you as a leader, how could you have done more if, and there's always room for improvement, done more in terms of satisfaction, motivation, and commitment?
Yeah, I think not to blow a trumpet too much, but I'd like to go at the top and say that yes, I thought the entire staff was motivated. They all saw. I remember when we won the 2016 World Events. Everybody was elated because again, what I did was in 2013 when we came in, we actually had a strategic review and it included everybody. And so everyone within the organization was very clear on their objectives and they all had tasks, and we all we saw the strategy map of how each task and everybody's job related to our overall success. So when we were successful, everybody saw it and everybody was very, very much a part of it. But we didn't always speak to that. You know, I made sure that there were monetary incentives as well. So at the end of all those successive years, there were bonuses, cash bonuses paid out to the staff for work done. It's something that private sector organizations would have done, but we did that at Cricket West Indies because I felt it was important that we were paying players. We had transitioned to a professional model. And, I like to say to persons, because a lot of people have commented and commended us for putting in professional contracts so that people could, quote unquote, the Jamaican vernacular, eat a food. But I like to say again, it was not about eating a food. It was so that we could get people committed and so that we could appraise them on the objectives. We felt that prior to 2014, when we had professional contracts, we could not actually hold anyone accountable for performance because we weren't actually paying them. And so paying a professional meant that we could now demand accountability. So we could demand fitness standards, and that's how we were able to improve that. We had professional contracts and the performance contracts, and so every player knew that their numbers meant their level of contract. You remember, and I don't want to get your show into any controversy, but in 2016, when there was a fallout, it was a performance-oriented contract that caused that. And that year, there were only 2 players who did not merit, based on our number system, a C contract. Most of the other players, their view was that we're going to get better. And so they got better and they wrote their contracts. So our contracts were based on international standards. So, for example, we said, if you weren't averaging 40 and over in domestic cricket, then you couldn't get a higher than a C contract or a B, whatever. I can't remember what the numbers were, but I remember 40 being the standard we wanted for our players in cricket, because we looked around the world and we said all the batters were averaging above 40. So if you're going to be any good at international cricket, then you need to come out of your regional cricket, domestic cricket, being able to average more than that. And players started to respond to that, and the management responded to that, the staffing responded to that, and so we thought we were on the right path. By that time, by 2019, when we played England, we had about 4 players in the batting that were averaging over 40. They were in the top 20 in the world, and we had 3 or 4 bowlers that were in the top 20 in the world. And so that's how we were able to move performance. And so was their job satisfaction? I thought so. Were they motivated? Absolutely. Not only the players, because they knew there was no cap on how many players could get A or B or C. There was just a cap on how many contracts we were giving out. And so players knew that if I did well, I didn't have to talk to the selector about what contract I was going to get. I knew the contract that I was writing. And we thought that not only did they feel satisfied, we saw the results on the field, and we started to get performances.
I heard 40 and I cringed, because I remember my days on Mona campus at the University of the West Indies, and 40 was the bare minimum to actually pass. And so I cringed because I never wanted a 40. So
yeah, well, Jeff, this is now not 40 out of 100, but your best. So this is how cricket averages go. The immortal Don Bradman has a 99.9 average. Nobody else has ever gotten anywhere close to him. And then the phenomenal people in the world average in the 60s. And then the very great ones average 50. And so, it's not 40 out of 100, as we would like to say in academia, but it's more 40 out of 60, which is more like 80% of the top in the world. So we felt that those were the numbers, and if your bowling averages were below 30, and you were getting X number of wickets, then we would regard your performance as getting into the realm that will allow us to be successful against our international counterparts.
So we're going to take a quick break. I mean, when I say a quick break, blink, and we are back But so therefore, please stay tuned as we look at part 2 of episode 72 of Sport and Human Resource Management with Mr. Whycliffe Dave Cameron. I didn't even know my name was Whycliffe. I always know it as Mr. Cameron, Mr. Dave Cameron. But research, Google helped, a big deal. Mr. Dave Cameron. And this is to tell you, please go and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Futsal868. We'll be right back in a blink.
Storybox Audio.
Yes, Storybox 1. We definitely want you all to go click and subscribe to our YouTube channel, guys. Let's do it. Let's. People keep saying that we have good content. We're not going to pat ourselves on the back. Go check it out and see for yourself, and tell a friend and tell a friend. So if it is you have just joined us on this special episode, part 2 of Futsal 868, episode 72. God has been amazing to us. 72 episodes where we speak to sport and human resource management. With us is Mr. Whycliffe Dave Cameron. Mr. Cameron, let's speak to facilitation and communication. As a leader dealing with a high property that is Cricket West Indies, in your days was West Indies Cricket Board. Speak to us as regards to your communication style to the stakeholders of the organization and the sport of cricket. Cricket is one of these, West Indies cricket is one of these sports that some people say, oh God, I'm going on dead. But pressure going up in my head. So you had to speak to your board, you had to speak to your employees, you had to speak to your players, you had to speak to the media, you had to speak to the International Federation, you had to speak to governments and government officials, you had to speak to the man on the street who say, that man Dave boy.
Mash up the thing.
But as a leader, that is part of human resource management from our research. Talk to me as regards to communication. Give us some stories when it comes to even crisis communication. How did you deal with that? How? I'm sure you have some great. I'm sure you dye here and you have some great hair. Right? And Mama was massaging your back for you.
Oh God.
Talk to us. Talk to us.
But Jeff, let me tell you, that one is a tough one. But what I did, Jeff, is so I think I would like to say I passed in some areas and I failed in a lot of areas to begin with. So let's agree on that. But what I did at the start was I went when I got elected in 2013. Nantan and myself, we went to a couple of the countries, the states of the region, and we sat with the leaders, the prime ministers. We went to St. Vincent, we went to Guyana, Grenada, Barbados, and we sat with the leaders at the time, and of course my own Jamaica. And we tried to, and most importantly, CARICOM. And we sat with them and I outlined our vision for West Indies cricket. We told them what was in my manifesto about, again, I reiterate, professionalizing West Indies cricket, running it as a business. We also spoke about how do we grow the sport for all, so democratize participation, etc. And what I didn't get, and I think that was where we lost it, was a commitment from them individually as to how we would operate going forward. What we did ask was for a forum to allow Cricket West Indies on a regular basis to come to CARICOM to report on our stewardship of the game. And I think that is one area where we failed. For whatever reason, we probably were not aggressive enough in asking to be put on the agenda, or we failed in just being able to get on the agenda. So we did communicate directly to CARICOM about our objectives. We sat with players, the senior players at the time, and we communicated again our vision to them. We thought there was general buy-in. We communicated to WIPA, and we were able to get WIPA on board in our new dispensation. But then there was this crisis, as you very well know about, in 2014 with our players abandoning the tour in India. And that to me was a failing of, again, not getting commitment from both sides in the same room. So although we felt we had communicated with WIPA and we had communicated previously with the players, we didn't get commitment for both of them at the same time. And we assumed wrongly that the players had bought into what WIPA had said and what we had negotiated. So there are some lessons there that we've learned. But I thought that we communicated very, very well in the boardroom, and we had the majority of the organization, the staffing, everybody was on board with our vision, albeit a very few persons, who didn't see to the vision of creating a professional Cricket West Indies. Now, as you know, we had many crises in West Indies cricket, and these crises didn't start today. It's been ongoing, and I think because of the importance of Cricket West Indies, there are always going to be challenges. How did we respond in those crises? I remember the tour in India. That was particularly very, very difficult. We had to call the prime ministers. I spoke to prime ministers directly. We had to issue a release. We put together a commission to review what had happened in India. And then we continued the communication. But part of my legacy, or the bad part of it, and I'm always been told, is that we did not communicate properly to the press. And I think in hindsight, we've said a lot of things, but what we didn't do each time we spoke to the press was to tie it back to our objectives. And so we would have been judged differently on maybe on the wrong things that were not part of our objectives. Again, coming back to our objectives, is that we were going to professionalize the game, democratize it, improve it for a lot more persons, and ensure that we started to win, most importantly, and fix our finances. Those were the things that we felt were important. Having served Cricket West Indies for 12 years in different capacities, when we assumed the helm, we felt that those things were most important. And so that's where we were. And I don't think we were able in our communication each time as an organization to keep bringing back our fans, the Caribbean, to our objectives. So it's not that we didn't have other things which are peripheral. Another administration may have the unity of the region at heart, and so we need to make sure we play a player from every island. That wasn't our objective. Our objective was we needed to make this a beacon for Caribbean people to show that we can be the best. And yes, we are 6 million, and I like to use the term poor people because we are relative to the rest of the world, but that organized properly, we already have the physical capabilities, is how do we use our smarts to start competing? And that was our objective, because we realized that even though we were not organized the best way we could and should be, that we were competing. So just to put that put the HR around what we were doing and organizing ourselves effectively, then we could start to compete. So that to me is a lesson in communication on all levels. Is each time in communicating, you need to always the remember your audience at each step, and you need to keep reiterating your objectives. And so, how are you meeting your objectives or not meeting your objectives? Because you can judge me, and you will judge me, and you will judge everybody else and every organization on your views of what the objective should be. But then objectively, and you have to address me, my organization, Cricket West Indies, whichever organization, on the objectives that I told you we have set. And so that to me is the lesson in the big lesson in communication, is at all times keep going back to your objectives and try to analyze where you would have missed the mark in terms of delivering on those objectives.
I want to applaud you as a leader by actually admitting that you missed the mark when it comes to this. So I'll ask this question, and it's put it into human resource management. In hindsight, and if given the opportunity again, would you hire a communications specialist and or a crisis communication specialist?
Well, we had communication specialists. We had Imran Khan at one point. I inherited Imran Khan of blessed memory, who passed away in Guyana just recently from COVID. May his soul rest in peace. He was the communication specialist at Cricket West Indies for a while. Carol Beckford was in that role for a while as well. But again, even with that, and this is important. So yeah, his answer is yes. We would need to have that type of person in place. But again, to any leader and any person within organizations like this, and it goes for political parties as well, because politics is sports, sports is politics, is that you have to keep going back to the objectives that you've given towards your campaign. I mean, I don't know how else you can hold yourself accountable to the people and to yourself if you're not going back to those objectives that you set for your organization. And don't believe that don't assume that anybody will remember it. You have to keep reminding them that this is what I said, this is what you agreed to, and this is what we've done. If you want something else, then let's agree that once we fix this, then we can do that. But I can't do everything.
As they say, black and white doesn't lie. Very important. But you know, in you speaking, you mentioned two main stakeholders: governments and the media. From my observation, this is just my observation, and you were very much articulated and understanding Caribbean culture and how it affects sport. Love that. And even from a politician standpoint, a political standpoint, Caribbean politics, a foundation course taught at the University of the West Indies, we find that politicians, when it's time for elections, they meet and greet. They go to the villages, they go to the highways and the byways, and they meet. Pictures of them shaking hands with the elderly, the young folks, doing all that they need to do, politicking to get that ticket to the big house. And not jail though, but the other big house. What we find many times, especially as young adults and young persons, is that when it is they put on those fancy dandies and head to the big house, somehow it feels like if they throw, is a James Bond movie where they throw a dynamite over their heads and they blow up the bridge between them and that common man, only to rebuild it when it's close to elections time. As to communication, and I see that happening in sports as well, because this is not a knock you, sir, but I didn't hear speaking to the common man. And yes, we may be using the news agencies, but in hindsight, do you think that you could have spoken more to the common man? And if you could have, how do you think you would have done such?
Well, Jeff, that's interesting. I don't know that any president before me, before Nantan and myself, have engaged the common man more than we did. We had town hall meetings all over the Caribbean. And these town hall meetings also had electronic media attached to it, so persons could call in, write in their questions, and we answer them. We had a town hall meeting in Jamaica. We had a town hall meeting in Nevis, as St. Kitts, and I think Nevis. Yes, and St. Kitts and Nevis. We had town hall meeting in Trinidad. We had town hall meeting in Barbados. For one of my AGM in Barbados, we opened it up for the clubs of Barbados to participate, to come in and ask questions. So I don't think there's been any other administration before us or after us that was more open to talking to the common folk. But I think what happened, Jeff, and again, I don't want to get too political, but a lot of persons have been calling me in the last couple of weeks, especially with the results in the T20, and saying that they felt what we were doing was the right thing. But what happened was that we allowed 3 or 4 voices to drown out the silent voices. And by that, people were quiet about what was going on, and we thought that the 3 voices were the popular or the most important ones. And so that's what happened. So I don't think, I mean, we would do it. If we had the opportunity, we would do it again, and we would do more. But we did communicate. We did go to the grassroots to communicate to our clubs, because we felt that the clubs, the territorial boards within the system, were our constituents. So I don't know if you're asking me, we should have gone to the bars and just whatever. But we did that, and we were always on. If anybody knows, I'm on all the social media platforms, so persons would send in messages, would communicate with me from time to time. I had no issues responding. One of the things that you would know, and anybody who gets into this position, and I always tell persons, I don't take it personal. I see this as the president of Cricket West Indies is separate from Dave Cameron. And so the criticisms are the president and not Dave. So now I'm not there, nobody criticizes me anymore. So it's not personal. And so I was always welcome to listen to the views. Again, the only reason you and I disagree most times is because we have different perspectives and different information. And so my view is always to listen to your perspective. But again, I had 12 years of Cricket West Indies, from the level of just being a regular director, also being the treasurer in Jamaica of one of the bigger boards, seeing the challenges and understanding it, also being the president of a club in Jamaica for 20 years. So having being in the system, having played, and now being able to administer, I think I was probably have seen more than most other persons. So while I listened, I would always say to persons that these are my perspectives as well. So I don't disagree with what you're saying, but these are my realities, and I can't ignore the realities just because you say that, irrespective of your your quote unquote standing in society?
It sounds like the 7 day syndrome attack, as well as favoritism. The popular game, which in the Caribbean always is. I do not think that in the Caribbean we are a people of racism. I believe which now may be creeping in, but historically is not. I think that we are people of class where favoritism follows very closely to it. So you would have mentioned that in some as in terms of favoritism, and then also the 7 day wonder where persons seem to forget. In some territories it might be 7 days, some people might some might be some might be 10, some might be 14. But it really goes back to culture, and you said it before, and we really have to look into that.
Yeah, and culture, Jeff, I don't want to cut you, but also if everybody could agree on what are the objectives, always remember that. Because in my mind, culture trumps strategy every day of the week. And so we always have to be reminded of that. And so, yes, we had a strategy, but we need to also address the culture. And that's what we're doing. But if each time we go to the culture, we can say, hey guys, I know this is what we normally do, but here what happened. We're trying to win here. So do we go back to the culture says that we need to have a player. If we're going to play in Antigua, we need to have a local playing because we're playing in Antigua, or do we want to win the game? And so we're going to play the best team, irrespective of if nobody's from Antigua or from Jamaica, whatever the case is. And those are the realities. It's not, as I said to people, it's not insularity. It is not favoritism. If Jeff, if myself and somebody else comes for a job and you're interviewing and one is from Trinidad, I'm from Jamaica, the guy from Trinidad, you're always going to lean towards the guy from Trinidad unless the Jamaican can impress you so much that you believe that you need to go there. And so that's just how our mind works, and our organizations. But again, if your objective is something different, then you may be forced to make a decision one way or the other. And so that is why I keep, unfortunately, I'm sorry, I keep going back to the objectives. Because if we agree on the objectives, then I think you're sometimes going to put yourself in a very difficult position to make different choices.
So that meanders nicely into decision making and problem solving, because again, leadership and leadership styles. What was yours when it came to those two items, decision making and problem solving? Which, as you mentioned, there were many. Given culture, especially given culture and the difference in culture that you have to deal with throughout the Caribbean.
Yeah, well, I'm going to be very specific about some things. So I'm going to give you a little insight into the culture of the region. Jamaica is very boisterous and have a view on everything. Barbados is very measured in when they speak, and you need to listen to them. They're not always speaking, but when they do speak, they're very measured about the objectives. But once you get, it will take time, but if you get Barbados to agree, you have someone who will understand for a long time. Guyana is a lot like Jamaica. They're in the beginning, they can be very disagreeable, but they're willing to be spoken to, and you will get them buying. They're a group, and I found this with Guyanese in general, whether Indians, black, whatever. They're a group that at the outset are not very trusting, but as you speak to them over time, they will get comfortable. Trinidadians are a little bit of a wild card. You never know where you are with them. One day you're good, the next day you're not so good. The smaller islands take feed from the majority within the room. And so that's generally how the board ran. That's generally how when you had teams and you had the mix of these countries within the room, you would expect the different islands to bring forward their communication and speak to you. And so with that in mind, that's kind of how we made decisions. And what I did was, for example, in the cricket committee, I had, in my first administration, I had somebody from St. Lucia leading it. Though very strong, very quiet, but understood the game. And so would not be rushed into making decisions, but would make decisions collectively. And so that's how I tried to run West Indies cricket, understanding each subset, each group, each country. And Jeff, I tried not to have a vote on matters, especially on stuff like the captaincy and where we would host games. I would delay. I would have as many meetings as possible to talk persons around a collective, and rather than a voting, because what has happened in the past and that I saw is the minute the meeting is over, you would go outside and you would say to the captain that, I didn't vote for you, or the other guy who didn't vote for you. And so that in itself created challenges within the organization. So on matters like that, we tried to make sure that we would have as many meetings as possible to get consensus. It may not be unanimous, but we'd try to get a clear majority that this is the way we want to go, because we realize how contentious it could be, and that the smaller islands, quote unquote, would not say anything publicly, but they would reserve their views. And so we had to find a way to make them be at the forefront so that their views could be heard, rather than being coerced or persuaded by the so-called bigger territories. So that was kind of a strategy that we used in most times in dealing with in the meetings. It worked in most instances, but again, there was a view that I leaned a lot towards the small islands, and so some of the bigger countries were upset. But this was to make everybody feel that they were part of Cricket West Indies, because the history says that they've always been left out. Now it's interesting that I was actually voted out by the smaller countries, but that's how the world works. Because under our presidency, our tenure, we had more players from around the region, minus the big three, playing than any other time in Cricket West Indies. So we were about democratizing cricket to ensure that everybody could play. Apparently, that was also a bad thing. But I don't think it was a failure on our part, because we now have, I think, the widest cross-section of players available to represent West Indies cricket. So in our mind, we were very clear about ensuring as much as possible that everybody had a voice. And I didn't take the position as a true politician in calling groups and lobbying them prior to meetings. I let the entire board dictate how we would go. But I must remark, Jeff, that as a leader, I'm a true leader in the sense that I always believe that I have a solution in everything that I'm putting out. And unless you can convince me, and unless the board can convince me otherwise, then I believe that this is the best way to go. So I'm not here saying to you that, I would come. My predecessor had that approach, which I didn't necessarily agree with. He would come in the meeting, we would have a particular agenda item, and he would just say discussion without any idea of where he wanted to go. Because I had an overarching objective on every subject, going back to those things that we outlined in our manifesto, then every decision is really a subset of the bigger objective. And so it was guided around that if we do that, then we're departing from something over here. And so our board was about setting standards, performance standards, standards how we communicated, how we carried ourselves, because we're representing the West Indies as a wider region.
It is not part of the question that I want to ask, but nevertheless, it popped up in my thought. A non-disclosure agreement for your board, do you think, is it something that you would advise any sporting leader to have?
Yeah, well, we have you have to sign a code of ethics, code of conduct, and a code of ethics. It's not necessarily a non-disclosure. I mean, we're not trying to what was the term he used? Shut down people from having their own views and being able to express that in the media. But we felt that there were certain principles that we needed to abide by. But we also wanted, because remember, the Western cricket is a unique animal, right? In that the territorial boards are the shareholders and they own us. Decisions taken within Western cricket needs to be communicated and agreed back in the territories. So we couldn't necessarily say you can't disclose what was discussed here. What we agreed is that once the decisions were communicated publicly, then the board members were at will to go back and communicate with their territorial board. So we would, at each board meeting, we would disclose to the press major decisions agreed at, and that would allow the boards to go back and get those agreements within their territories and respond to us. So a non-disclosure, I don't think is the right document. What we had was a code of ethics and a code of conduct. We had an ethics officer, and we had a committee. So if you breach the code of ethics, you could be subject to the code. And there are instances where persons, directors, have been subjected to the code of ethics. I think the current code of ethics committee is chaired by Justice Winston Anderson of the CCJ. And so we're very serious about that, about conducting the business at a very high level, and that our directors would understand the seriousness of what we're doing.
As we go to start our last over of this match.
Is that T20?
Yeah, it's a T20. The second to last question surrounds change management. And I would like you to give our viewers the change management process you would have undergone as a sport leader, and suggestions to sport leaders in the future of how they should navigate change management from the lessons you have learned.
Wow, that is the big lesson, right? Because I think the black eye, if anything, is that huge change that we undertook in 2014 when we changed the remuneration contracts of Cricket West Indies, and we had a huge fallout with the players, which I don't think we recovered from. And I use this opportunity to say, Jeff, that when we took over in 2013, things were so great. We took our players on a familiarization trip in Florida, which the media heavily criticized us for at the time, that we were off in Florida having fun when we were supposed to be preparing for a tour in India or somewhere there. But again, we felt at the time, with the changes we were proposing, that we needed to have a certain kind of relationship with our players. So I went with the team to Florida. We stayed in the same room. I rode on the same bus with them. I remember Richie Richardson, who was the manager at the time, commenting to me that no previous president would have ridden on the same bus with the players. So I was trying to change the concept of what a president was in previous years, where it was this guy who nobody really communicated with or saw, to one where I'm accessible. And in my mind, I think that might have backfired in the end because the players felt I was too close to them and I was too accessible, and so might have affected the respect factor. So I say that to say, in change management and in doing these things, we have to be mindful of the level that we go to and how far we want to move from one spectrum to the other. Maybe I did it was too quick, going from someone who the players never really communicated with to I was kicking football with them in Florida, playing basketball, bowling to them. And so, maybe I was seen as just a regular guy rather than the leader of the organization. So those are some of the lessons. The other one that's very important is, and I said it earlier, you can't underestimate communication to all parties. Even though do not take it for granted that the other parties or all of the parties have agreed. So the mistake we made was to believe that having agreed with the Players Association that we had communicated with extensively about where we were going, that all the players had signed on and agreed to what they were saying to us. Because that was a position in previous administrations where they would just take whatever the Players Association says. So we missed the mark there. My advice is in the future is communicate to all the groups that will be affected and get their sign off. It may take some more time, but it is important. I must say we were, because by nature, you mentioned at the top of the show about Usain Bolt and all our exploits. By nature, as a Jamaican, as somebody who was always involved in winning, I went to a high school that is one of the most popular high schools in Jamaica, a boys' school, Kingston College. We only know about winning. I'm part of a club, Kensington Cricket Club, that has produced some of the greatest cricketers out of Jamaica, the Patrick Patterson, Basil Williams, Richard Austin, Lawrence Rowe, Wavell Hines, you name them. We're accustomed to winning, and I was impatient. I will not say that. I will not deny that I wasn't impatient. So we were trying to get to starting to perform sooner than maybe we should have, because we've been just doing so badly for so many years. And like I said, I've been part of the organization, but not really having a voice on the direction. And so when we got the opportunity, we now felt that this was where we needed to go. We got the opportunity when the agreement was thrown out, the previous agreement was thrown out in Trinidad and Tobago High Court. And so we had the opportunity, we negotiated with the Players Association. And that change, I think, was just, it was a shock to the system. And I don't think we communicated well enough and long enough to the players. And so those are the lessons that we would have learned from that.
Kingston College, KC,
Purple Heart. You get it, Jeff. And if you Google KC, we've won everything. I won Sunlight Cup, which is the premier cricket competition while I was there as vice captain to, Robert Samuels, brother of Marlon, who played for the West Indies as well. So we were at school together. And so I'm a competitor. I'm not going to make any apologies for that. But because of the complexity and the region and what we were dealing with, and the truth is, I didn't get the support and the understanding from the media when we came in about what we were about to do. And so every thing we did, we were just criticized. But again, our failure was not being able to bring them back to our objectives. So if you ask me, our failing was always to hold everybody accountable and say, this is what we told you we were going to do. We didn't say we were going to do that X, Y, and Z, but that would be a byproduct. So if it is you want an organization that everybody loves the leader, then that's not what we said we were going to do. If you want something that you will play the most popular players, that's not what we said we were going to do. We're going to give you a team that represents our pride and passion and that will win cricket matches for us. That's what we said we were going to do. We're going to improve the structure in terms of performance contracts, in terms of improving the number of players available, etc. That's what we said we're going to do.
Do we have the right people to advance sport in the Caribbean?
Yes, and I say that categorically because we do have, and at the start we mentioned that we do have a lot of young people who have played the sports and now they've been given through the universities across the region opportunity to understand management and sports. Because Jeff, let's face it, all the things that we've spoken to you about is what I've learned for the last 30 years. I've been a manager for 30 years. My first job out of college is I've been managing people who could have been my parents at the time. So I am lucky. All the things I'm talking to you about is stuff I've learned being a manager. And so that is what we're saying. We do have we have the quality, and we are massively talented from that perspective in terms of our physical abilities. We do have the people. Is how do we now, as suspects, through shows like yourselves, through persons like myself going on forum and really starting to get the mindset around what is it that we want for different sports. And if we do understand and agree where we want to go, then I think there are enough persons around that can help us to achieve those objectives.
Closing remarks, Mr. Cameron.
I just want to thank you again for the opportunity to talk to you. It's probably the first time I've had to speak about the business of West Indies cricket rather than West Indies cricket. And I make that distinction because, again, that's what we were doing, Jeff. We were dealing with the business of cricket rather than the cricket. And that is why, again, the challenges have been with some former players. And I will never knock our former players. They are the reasons I did what I did because of all the joy that they provided to us. But again, unless you understand these principles that we just went through with human resources management, etc., it's always going to be difficult to steer a massive ship like Cricket West Indies. It's a massive ship with so many different turns, and the cultural differences across our region just makes it very, very tough to run. So I hope I've added some value to your shows. And if you ever need me in the future to come and have these kind of conversations again, and I'm more than willing to come on.
Well, we definitely will be having you again because we want to speak to you as regards to sport tourism, knowing the present incarnation that you hold, designation that you hold. So we definitely will have you again, Mr. Cameron. It has been an utmost pleasure having the one and only Mr. Whycliffe Dave Cameron touch the set of Futsal 868 Corner Talks and give us a beautiful perspective from the West Indies Cricket Board side of things and his leadership when it comes to human resource management in sport. So for the young ones who are looking on, who may be using this as part of your dissertation, your research project, continue to look at everything else that we have done. And we are blessed to be able to have our sporting leaders right here at Futsal868 Corner Talks. So, Mr. Cameron, to you and yours, we wish God's richest blessings and have a great one.
Thank you very much, and the very, very same to you and yours, sir.
No problem, sir. So, this is part 2 of Futsal868 Corner Talks, episode 72. You have watched Sport and Human Resource Management. We'll see you Sunday again, where we speak to sport and health. Have a good one.